Alright guys, TacticalRab again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. And after all 12 CDL teams made changes going into the upcoming season, there's so many players that the pressure is seriously on to deliver this time around, or their careers might be in a very different position 12 months from now. So many players across loads of different teams that qualify for this one. Of course, there's some big names on the biggest name team of all that are being thrown into the conversation as well. Very much interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Firstly, I know there's been some questions about exactly when Ranked is going to come out in the new game. We've heard that it's going to be like Season 1 Reloaded. People want it as soon as possible. In an ideal world, Ranked arrives probably 2 weeks into the game's life cycle. The game does well at launch, then, you know, maybe calms down a little bit, then bang, Ranked play arrives with an actual proper rule set, right? Because you can't really launch Ranked when you don't know what the comp maps and the comp rule set is going to be. I don't know if that's going to happen. The current rumours are that it's going to be delayed somewhat longer than that, and it might be quite significantly into the new year again. So maybe not the best sign, but again, I guess it's going to be Treyarch that are doing the job on it, isn't it? Rather than the actual developer of the game itself, which is, you know, probably not optimal. There was also, we're going to discuss OpTic in a second. You guys might well remember a few years ago, OpTic India CSGO player Forsaken. This is I think it's 6 years ago maybe now, something like that. Anyway, crazy stuff. His ban has now come to a close, so he can now compete again, which is kind of hilarious. I don't know what he's up to nowadays. There is also a player called Forsaken who is a Valorant player, but it's a different guy. It's not OpTic India Forsaken, the you know, the legend for multiple reasons. It did make me wonder what happens to Jimbo, because, you know, Jimbo was quite explicitly just this guy. If you don't know the story, he literally turned up to LAN, plugged in his you know, USB stick, and downloaded a file called word.exe onto it. And that was basically his cheating thing. And eventually they caught him, and the referees were behind him, and his teammates were looking over like, what's going on? Classic stuff from several years ago in the CS days. And it wasn't really a great sign for OpTic, because, you know, they'd signed these guys. Now, yes, this was Infinite Esports. They'd come in. They'd made the decision to expand into India. And, yeah, it wasn't really a great look for OpTic that they'd basically signed a cheater. But he was banned by the Esports Integrity Commission or whatever for years. Now he's back, and there's questions people are saying are, you know, Steel and some of these other guys that were banned by Valve for the match-fixing saga on iBuyPower, you know, they're still banned from playing in official Valve tournaments. But now Forsaken, who literally hacked on LAN and it was caught doing so, is apparently perfectly fine. Now, okay, Jimbo didn't cheat on LAN, we don't think, but he did cheat. He had cheats on his computer at some point over the previous few months while he was playing the Challengers qualifiers and such. So what's his punishment? We don't really know. Like, okay, there was all the frustration of the players, especially the likes of Doug Martin, that Jimbo had kind of cost them from qualifying for the Challengers World Championship during that whole saga, but yet there was no real repercussions there. Has Jimbo been, you know, if the CDL said, all right, Jimbo's banned eternally, like, we don't know. No, it probably doesn't massively matter, because no one's gonna pick Jimbo back up, you would think, and if they were to, then I'm sure there might be some sort of ruling in place. But still controversial. I do wonder if there's going to be anything still on that going forward. Now let's talk about some of the players that are getting ready for the new season. This I thought was a pretty disgusting play here from Shotzzy and Hella. Look at this nady throws through this gap here to pick up these couple of kills. But with loads of teams making changes going into the new year, so many players have the pressure seriously on them to deliver this year, because a lot of these teams either underperformed somewhat last season, or they did really well, but they're still making changes. So the player that you bring in that scenario has a lot to live up to, and that's the case in at least a couple of different spots. The big one, of course, is always going to be OpTic, just because OpTic's the biggest team, they've got the most fans. If there's a pressureometer, it's always going to be most on OpTic, even if there's not one player specifically. The pressure is always on OpTic more than anyone to deliver, because that's simply how it works. So the two names people are looking at on OpTic really are Dashy and Shotzzy. I guess really the two players that were here before and have presided over a period for at least the last couple of years of not really all that much success for the Green Wall. Now the two new players come in, and okay, you can talk about the pressure being on them to turn the ship around, but really you can argue it's on the players that stayed, that they weren't the problem all along.
Not Burner with a question: which player has the most to prove this season? Pred, Sib, Priestahh, Dashy, Drazah. What do you guys think? Who do you
out of this list?
I think it has to be Priestahh. Bro just got dropped off winning a world championship.
Yeah,
he has something to prove.
Preston's a big shout.
He's had something to prove. Like,
He's had something to prove every year. I think it's Dashy and Pred, mainly because Pred is out here, for blood. He's been on that Seattle roster for like basically the start of his career, and that guy's been a superstar player. So like this guy wants to like win everything, and now he's on a team that could potentially do so because of how good their ceiling is. But Dashy, man, I think Dashy, obviously he was scapegoat on the OpTic team for a bit. He got dropped. They picked him back up. They ended up, finding a little bit of success here and there, but they ultimately couldn't win. But like, bro, no excuses anymore. OpTic got a roster that, on paper, should win at least something.
They got a good roster. They got a really good roster.
They need to elevate and finally, come out on top at some point during the season.
I think Dante's a good shot as well, bro. Sib's going to a team that's won 3 chips and a world championship, and he's looking to be that guy to elevate these guys. I'm just curious to see how he meshes with them and how they work together. But go ahead, Ben.
I agree with Chris, bro. Like, I think every person on this 5 that's listed here has something to prove. But I think the person that's is in the the most hot seat to me is probably Dashy because of the expectations of OpTic. And the fact of the matter is, like, there's just, bro, you can't, like, you're bringing in Ken now. You can't complain that there's just weird organizational issues. It just wasn't a fit with Dan, wasn't a fit with Inder, wasn't a fit with Rambo. Like, you've addressed
Shotzzy and Dashy should be together in this, by the way.
If you can't figure it out now, and they can't figure out a way to like get over the hump of seconds and playing good at a couple events and not being a factor at champs, like this is really it at this point.
Damn, JP.
There's plenty of names to talk about here. I'm sure you guys will have your thoughts in the comment section below. I wanted to look at the Surge roster real quick because they were recently confirmed. I don't think there's much pressure on aBeZy, but I think the rest of the team, probably even including Rambo, has some degree of pressure on them to show up this season. I mean, Hook, Illy, Arcetes all were on OpTic over the last few years, as was Rambo, right? Okay, Arcetes was on when it was Chicago Huntsman, but kind of the same idea. Hook, again, has to prove, I guess, that last year he wasn't just getting the Shotzzy teammate buff, which might well exist, and that he can actually show up on LAN this year because, as I've said before, they need the best version of Hook, Illy, and Arcetes with a solid season opener from aBeZy if they want to succeed with this roster. So, they're going to need more from Hook than he delivered on the Gorillas. Illy as well has quite something to prove because I know there's still people that think, and I can understand why, there's some hangover from that thumb injury during the Vanguard season. Is he quite back to his best? Is he going to be capable of, winning events and winning world championships again as he did back in 2020? That's a question that he's got to answer. But then again, he's been dominating all the off-season tournaments, so I'm sure that it's possible. Arcetes is probably the name that I'm looking at most, though, from this team. 2-time world champion. Last year was, a bit of a howler, let's be honest. He's got to prove that this year he can get back to the form in which he can actually contend for event wins, or at least try and get these guys into that type of position, prove that he can be a better teammate, prove that he's not a 2-time world champion for no reason at all, and prove that this whole idea of Arcetes and Illy teaming up because they're friends, basically, right? This is being touted as kind of one of the Friendship League teams. They need to prove that that's not just the case, and there's more to it than that. And you can probably find at least one player on like every team in which this applies to some extent. I mean, Heretics maybe not so much. Vikul, there's some questions just because Vikul is going to start, we think, and we think JurNii's on the bench, which is kind of interesting. So, a lot of people would say, oh, maybe JurNii should start and Vikul should be bench or something like that. So something to prove, but, it won't last that long if the team doesn't work. They'll make some changes with their sub bench. Envoy though, right? Ultra, CleanX, Insight, Scrappy. You could maybe say Insight, there's some pressure on him just because last year, stat-wise, he didn't have like a crazy season. So maybe there's something to be said there. But for me, it's like Ultra did so well last year with even Standy, but then certainly with Hixie, they were probably better than people thought. I mean, look at that team. Scrap, Insight, Hixie, CleanX. It sounds good on paper, but it doesn't quite sound as good as they ended up being. Winning an event, of course, at Major 3, making the World Championship Grand Final, although that didn't go so well. Now they make the upgrade. Envoy comes in, and this team has to win, right? I mean, they won last year with Hixie. Envoy comes in as the upgrades. They have to win. The pressure's on Envoy to deliver the goods and show why he was the man they wanted to sign for the big bucks, whatever they were trying to pay him. But I think the main ones are the ones you're going to find on this page. So I guess we'll start with FaZe. Again, Drazah, there's obviously some pressure there. He made the difficult and controversial decision to turn down the OpTic move to go and join FaZe. effectively, he has to win more than OpTic do. There's no excuses. He has to come in this season to FaZe, win more events than OpTic, win more prize money than OpTic, because otherwise, you know, he'll have kind of made the wrong decision. So there's pressure on him to deliver, and also there's just pressure on him really to get FaZe to where they want to be. Slasher, I think, was a good player for FaZe, no doubt, but Slasher and Cellium AR combo didn't really work, forced Simp into playing more of a kind of dirty work type role. Maybe there's some pressure on Simp as well, because people are expecting this year for Simp to be a real return to form. He was so good in the most recent, relatively higher time to kill game in Cold War. I think we would expect that to continue. And yeah, given the fact that Simp has been touted for some time as, you know, the next greatest in the top 10 of all time, is he going to be pushing up for the best ever in a couple of years? We haven't really seen that same level Simp that arrived on the scene in Black Ops 4 and was absolutely unkillable and looked like he was going to go down as the greatest ever at some point in the future, given how young he was. We haven't really seen that version of Simp over the last title. Okay, couple of titles. Maybe he was pretty good at Vanguard, but, you know, this most recent year, again, it was okay. They won an event, but, you know, it wasn't quite the Simp of old. So I think there's something to be said about that. I think Drazah can probably get that out of them as well, because he can take over some of the things that Simp was doing last year. Subliners, I know that people were talking about Priestahh, right, going to Boston, and I get that. I would say it's much more so the other way around. To me, Priestahh has proven everything he needs to prove. This guy was won the most loud events of the CDL era. He, you know, gets signed to the New York Subliners, wins 3 events, including the World Championship. He's achieved it all in COD. He's won everything now. He's won champs. He's won the other events. He's been a great player for years, pre-CDL, into the CDL. I don't really think Priestahh has much left to prove. I see it much more so the other way around, where Sib has the pressure massively on him. I mean, you're getting signed to replace someone who is consistently kind of, you know, overlooked, I guess, in terms of what Priestahh has accomplished, I would say. And Sib, who's won 1 event in his career on Seattle Surge, Major 3 during the Vanguard year, he comes in as a player that is very talented, no doubt, but had a bit of a lackluster finish to last season. He's come in as the guy to the Subliners to make sure they stay at the level of FaZe and OpTic with the upgrades they have theoretically made. So I think the pressure is massively on him, right? And this is where, you know, it's difficult to come into a system that's just won the World Championship and try and be an upgrade for one of the players that they got rid of. Like, I would say of all the players in the league, Sib might have the most pressure on him because, you know, people are expecting Subliners, and especially because they got HyDra, who's the best player in the world right now, they're looking to continue that success. The fans are expecting great things, and Sib needs to deliver on it. You can also look at some of their teams. I guess we'll kind of finish out here talking about the obvious, which is OpTic Texas. And you can look at on the Thieves and talk about, you know, players like Afro and others that have maybe struggled a little bit over the last year or so. Afro got benched, right? Let's not forget. So, you know, Afro does need to play well, because if he gets benched again, you got to wonder where he goes next in his career. But OpTic is the obvious one, of course. And again, you can look at the players that got signed in Kenny and in Pred to turn the team around. But I think in OpTic's case, it's more so the other way around. Like with FaZe, the pressure isn't really on aBeZy or Cellium because they've been great the last few years and they've won a lot of events. But for OpTic, Shotzzy and Dashy have won 1 event in their tenure on this team. And okay, Shotzzy hasn't been around that long, only since the start of the merger happens and they go into the Vanguard season. But Dashy's been around longer than that. He's been around on OpTic since 2018 when he won his first event on the roster. And since then, it's been very much up and down and not really all that good. There's been some highs, there's been certainly some lows. And I would say this time is when the team really needs to succeed, right? Because Dashy's been dropped a couple of times in the last 12 months, right? And it's happened before, and it might happen again if this team doesn't work. So I think that the pressure is on Shotzzy to some extent, but just because Dashy's been around on the team for longer, and now they've signed, I mean, you can't do much better than this, really. You get Pred in for Hook, I mean, one of the most promising talent to the next generation, and then Kenny comes in. Okay, they could have got Drazah, but I think either way, that's a really great pickup. It's like, if this team doesn't succeed, the questions aren't on Pred or Kenny. The questions are on, I would say, Shotzzy and Dashy. And probably Dashy especially, given how long he's been around. So yeah, very much enjoyed your thoughts and all this stuff in the comment section below. Probably loads of names you guys can look at here. And, well, the guys on the flank did that during the clip that I shared. So hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.